The hall of the Galactic Union was vast enough to swallow a city. Transparent domes revealed a backdrop of stars wheeling in slow arcs above a frozen horizon, while alien delegates shifted in their seats, whispering in dozens of tongues. The Union's trial sessions were meant to be ceremonial, yet tonight the air was sharp with tension. Professor Jerkael stood at the center podium, his crystalline scales glittering under pale light. His voice, amplified by the chamber's translation lattice, carried a tone of finality. Humans, he declared, are a species unsuited for survival beyond their temperate cradle. They claim adaptability, but place them on Cryovatha's surface, and they will perish before their primitive lungs fill a second breath. It is folly to admit them as equals. The room rippled with soft clicks, hums, and trills, alien laughter. Several delegates nodded, their tendrils or antennae twitching in agreement. At the edge of the chamber, Captain Elena Torres clenched her fists. She had tolerated a month of dismissive speeches, veiled insults, and deliberate misinterpretations of humanity's history. But this cold dismissal of human resilience, cut too deep. She rose, her chair scraping against the polished floor. Heads turned, some curious, some irritated at the breach of decorum. Her voice, clear and unflinching, sliced through the chamber. You claim we can't survive Cryovath? Then give me 10 minutes on your frozen rock, Professor. I'll show you what survival looks like. A pause. Then, laughter, louder, sharper, filling the dome until it echoed like shattering glass. Jerkael tilted his head, mandibles spreading in what passed for a grin. Amusing. The human wishes to gamble her species' reputation on a childish boast. 10 minutes on Cryovath? You will freeze before you even think of shelter. Elena's gaze locked with his. Shelter is exactly what I'll think of. The Union moderator, a serpentine Kelry whose voice rumbled like stone, flicked his tail in annoyance. The challenge is irregular. Let it proceed, interrupted a voice from the upper tiers. A towering Oryxian leaned forward, eyes gleaming with interest. The human offers spectacle. We enjoy spectacle. The chamber buzzed. The decision was made. Cryovath greeted them with a scream of wind. Elena stepped from the transport sled into a world of white and blue. Ice stretched to the horizon, broken only by jagged ridges and yawning crevasses. The sky was pale, the sun a dim smear through roiling clouds. Her visor readouts blinked warnings. -72 degrees Celsius, wind speed 90 kilometers per hour. Her breath fogged inside her helmet as she scanned the landscape. No trees, no caves, no tools beyond the small survival kit strapped to her back. Just snow, ice, and time. 10 minutes of it. Behind her, Jerkael descended slowly, encased in a gleaming exosuit. His voice carried over comms, smug and resonant. Observe, Union delegates. Already her limbs stiffen. Already her kind falters. Elena ignored him. She dropped to one knee and plunged a gloved hand into the snow. It was compact, slightly moist beneath the crust. Perfect. She nodded once, then began. She worked quickly, carving blocks with the edge of her emergency spade. The snow yielded clean cuts, stacking neatly as she envisioned the dome. Her muscles screamed against the cold, but motion itself generated warmth. A rhythm built. Carve, lift, place. Union drones hovered overhead, transmitting the feed across the chamber light years away. Delegates whispered as they watched the humans scrape together crude blocks of ice. To them it looked primitive, desperate. To Elena it was Survival 101. Jerkael's voice intruded again. Do you see, counselors? Child's play. She scratches at the ground like an animal digging a den. Inefficient. Futile. Elena didn't look up. Funny thing about animals, Professor, she said between breaths. They survive where academics freeze. Minutes bled away. The base ring of the igloo formed, each block angled inward. Her hands moved with practiced certainty, memory guiding her more than thought. She had studied old Inuit methods during survival training on Earth, fascinated by how ancient humans mastered the elements with almost nothing. Her visor chimed, 5 minutes remaining. The wind picked up, throwing sheets of ice against her suit. The dome was half built. Jurkael chuckled. She will not finish. The storm strengthens, as Cryavath always does. I predicted this exact outcome in my paper. The inevitability of human failure. Bet you didn't predict this. Elena grunted as she tilted a block inward, locking it against its neighbor. Snow dust spilled, sealing the cracks. The wall rose higher, curving into the beginnings of a roof. Her arms trembled with strain. The timer blinked 4 minutes. 3.5. Sweat froze against her back despite the thermal layers. She pushed harder, focusing on the shape, on the small hollow of safety forming inside. A sudden gust nearly tore a block from her grip. She caught it, slammed it down, and pressed snow against the seams. The igloo stood, fragile, incomplete, but standing. 2 minutes, barked the moderator over comms. Elena ducked inside, crouching low. The air immediately felt stiller, muffled from the shrieking wind. She exhaled slowly, a faint cloud lingering instead of vanishing. The difference was real. She tapped her comm, shelter achieved. The drones whirred closer, scanning temperatures. Inside, -15 degrees Celsius. Outside, -72 degrees Celsius. A gap wide enough to matter. Wide enough to live. Silence fell across the channel. Then, voices, aliens murmuring in disbelief. Jurkael hissed, mandibles clacking. This proves nothing. Temporary reprieve, nothing more. Elena leaned back against the snow wall, letting the cold bite her cheeks but refusing to shiver. 10 minutes, Professor. That was the bet. And in 10 minutes, I've built a place to outlast your storm. What have you built besides excuses? The last seconds ticked down. The igloo stood firm. Elena Torres, human, had carved survival from a wasteland while the galaxy watched. Back in the chamber, the silence was heavy. Delegates exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable. Jurkael shifted, his scales dimming with agitation. The Oryxian who had called for spectacle finally broke the quiet. Primitive, yet effective. His eyes glowed faintly. Perhaps the professor underestimates these humans. Elena's image flickered on the central holoscreen, her face flushed but steady. She gave the faintest of smiles. We don't just adapt, she said. We improvise. The chamber stirred. The challenge was only beginning, but the first blow had landed. Humanity had proved they could turn nothing into survival, and Elena knew the professor wouldn't forgive her for it. The igloo stood like a pale jewel against the endless ice, its curved walls defying Cryavath's merciless storm. Inside, Elena crouched low, her helmet lights casting faint halos across the snow-packed interior. For a moment she allowed herself to breathe. The air was stiller here, almost quiet. The storm's roar had dulled to a muffled growl. But the challenge wasn't over. Her visor readout ticked down. Phase 2, endurance under observation. The Union drones hovered near the entrance, lenses flickering as they measured structural integrity and body vitals. Beyond them, Jurkael's towering exosuit loomed like a shadow, his claws folded neatly in front of him. You have built your snow cave. His voice crackled across comms, heavy with disdain. A clever trick copied from your ancestors. But survival is not a performance, it is sustained existence. Let us see if your crude shelter lasts longer than a breath. Elena smirked despite her exhaustion. Funny. I thought survival was existence. Guess I'll just keep breathing to spite you. Jurkael said nothing, but his claws twitched. Minutes stretched. Elena worked inside, reinforcing seams with packed snow, angling her blocks tighter against the dome. Each adjustment was meticulous. She knew one weak line could mean collapse under pressure. Her gloves were stiff with frost, her arms burning from strain. Still, she pushed on. Outside, the storm thickened. The wind howled like a beast, claws of ice raking across the dome. Every gust rattled the igloo, shaking fine crystals loose from the ceiling. Elena pressed a block firmer into place, her breath coming ragged through her mask. A sudden crack split the quiet. Her head snapped toward the wall, one seam had shifted. She moved quickly, shoving snow into the gap before it spread. Then her comms spiked with interference, static, a whining pulse that almost drowned out her own breathing. She tapped her wrist console. Signal distortions weren't natural, they were deliberate. Elena Torres, Ylathar's voice slid through the static, sharp and mocking. Ylathar's winds do not always stay in one direction. Unstable systems, treacherous currents, they can shift without warning. Did you account for that, human? The storm outside roared louder, as if summoned. Her visor data blinked red. Local wind shear, trajectory altered. She narrowed her eyes. That wasn't natural drift. Someone was feeding false coordinates into the weather drones orbiting the test site. Someone wearing crystalline scales. You're cheating, she said flatly. Cheating? His chuckle was like glass breaking. This is observation. If humans cannot endure against random variance, what value is their resilience? Unless, of course, your adaptability cannot extend to the unpredictable. Her jaw tightened. He wanted her angry, desperate, broken. Fine. Let him watch. She shoved another block into place, bracing the wall. Each motion was deliberate now, conserving energy while keeping her rhythm steady. The interference buzzed at her ears, but she drowned it out with memory. Cold training fields in Alaska, endless survival drills where the only rule was improvise or freeze. Professor, she muttered, just loud enough for the drones to catch. You think unpredictability scares us? We're the species that thrived through ice ages, deserts, plagues, and worse. We don't need perfect data. We just need grit. The feed carried her words back to the chamber light years away. Delegates leaned closer, murmurs rippling through the gallery. Ylathar reply was clipped, almost strained. Poetic nonsense. Words will not hold your walls together. Neither will arrogance. Another crack split the ceiling, louder this time. Snow sifted down across her visor, clinging like dust. She worked fast, packing fresh blocks into the breach. Her arms trembled, but her movements were steady, deliberate. The timer ticked. She had already passed the first endurance mark. Her body screamed at her to stop, to rest, to let the storm have its way. But stopping meant death. And worse, it meant proving him right. Elena, you need to stabilize now, her wrist console whispered, automonitor reading her vitals. Pulse elevated. Core temp dropping. I know, she hissed. Her hands pressed harder, snow sealing under pressure. Block by block, patch by patch, the dome held. Outside, the exosuit shifted again. Ylathar's mandibles clicked in irritation, though his voice stayed calm. Curious. I expected collapse by now. But perhaps you cling longer than insects. Elena chuckled dryly, breath fogging her visor. Insects survive ice ages too. Maybe you should study them more. Silence. Then the static eased, as if he'd withdrawn his interference for a moment. The union moderator's voice finally broke in, gravelly and neutral. Structural integrity, stable. Human vitals, declining but within survivable range. Observation continues. She exhaled relief. At least someone was keeping it honest. Another 15 minutes bled away. Elena's muscles burned, but she had adapted her rhythm. Short, efficient movements, conserving energy while reinforcing weak points. The igloo now looked less like a hurried shell and more like a fortress against the storm. Her visor displayed new readings, internal temperature rising slightly. Her own body heat was warming the hollow. Proof of success. Proof of life. Ylathar, however, was far from conceding. His claws flexed against the snow, leaving sharp grooves. His tone dripped disdain. So you built a bubble of ice. What then? Do you imagine you can build civilizations this way? That crude shelters prove a species worthy of the Union. Elena wiped frost from her visor, gaze steady. Civilizations don't start with skyscrapers. They start with fire, caves, and tents stitched from hides. They start with survival. And survival is the root of everything. Her words carried again, and this time the chamber fell silent. Delegates leaned forward, listening not to Jerkael, but to the human crouched in her snow dome on a frozen wasteland. For the first time since the challenge began, Elena saw doubt flicker across the professor's face. The storm howled. The igloo held. And Elena Torres, battered and shivering but unbroken, smiled through her frost-bitten breath. "Still breathing, Professor," she whispered. "Still surviving." The drones recorded every word. The battle was far from over, but humanity's case was no longer a laughing matter. The storm outside raged on, a white wall of sound battering the igloo's curved sides, but inside Elena sat in silence, her breath steady. The shelter no longer felt fragile. It pulsed with warmth, a small defiance against Cryovatha's cruelty. Every block she had laid now worked as a testament, sealing her victory one frozen seam at a time. Her visor readout confirmed it. Internal temperature stabilized at survivable levels. The air wasn't comfortable, but it was life. She flexed her stiff fingers and allowed herself a thin smile. Outside, Jerkael's exosuit loomed in the snow, a black figure against endless white. His mandibles clicked with agitation, audible even through static. "This is theater," he snapped, addressing the Union drones hovering above. "Temporary reprieve does not equal survival. She cannot last an entire cycle. The human will eventually freeze." Elena leaned forward, speaking calmly into her comms so the entire chamber could hear. "Temporary? I'm warm enough to think, warm enough to plan, warm enough to keep building if I need to. That's not temporary, Professor. That's sustainable. That's the difference between giving up and making a future." Her words rolled across the feed. The gallery light years away buzzed with murmurs. Delegates who had scoffed at her minutes earlier now leaned forward, their expressions sharper, more attentive. The Oryxian delegate's deep voice broke the noise. "The human claims sustainability. Verification is required." The drones moved closer, projecting fresh data. Air quality, stable. Core body temperature, rising. Structural integrity, 94%. Numbers the Union couldn't ignore. Jerkael hissed, mandibles spreading wide. "This is manipulation. Her readings are skewed. Her body heat cannot possibly sustain such levels. This is falsified." Elena tilted her head, her voice edged with challenge. "Then prove it. Step inside." The chamber erupted in chatter. Even through the static of the storm, Elena could hear the shock ripple through the council. Jerkael froze, his claws twitching as if the idea itself was offensive. "Inside that crude heap of snow?" he scoffed, though the strain in his tone betrayed unease. "Yes," Elena pressed, voice sharp. "You're the scientist. Test the hypothesis. If it's a lie, expose it. If it's real, acknowledge it. Unless you're afraid of a little human ingenuity." Her words landed like a strike. The Oryxian's eyes gleamed, clearly enjoying the spectacle. "An excellent proposal. Let the professor test the shelter." Jerkael shifted, his crystalline scales dimming to a darker hue. Pride warred with caution, but the council's silence bore down on him. To refuse now would mean weakness. Slowly, with visible reluctance, he lumbered forward, each step of his exosuit crunching deep into the snow. The igloo's entrance was narrow. He had to disengage part of the suit's plating just to crawl inside. Elena scooted aside, giving him space. Their helmets glowed faintly in the dim, their breaths clouding the air. The moment he settled, the contrast hit him. His mandibles twitched involuntarily as his sensors registered the shift. The howl of the storm dulled, and warmth, faint but undeniable, wrapped around them. Elena folded her arms. "Still think it's temporary?" For once, the professor had no immediate retort. His claws flexed slowly, scraping faint lines into the packed snow. Outside, the drones relayed every flicker of his vitals, every reading from his suit. The chamber erupted again, delegates stunned at the empirical proof. At last, Jerkael spoke, his voice low, forced. The temperature differential is significant. Significant enough to live, Elena countered. That's the point. We don't need luxury. We need survival. And we'll always find a way. Her words struck deeper than numbers ever could. The Union had heard countless speeches from humanity's diplomats, all laced with appeals and promises. None had landed like this. A human crouched in a dome of ice, proving survival through action, not theory. The Oryxian's deep voice resonated again, filled with satisfaction. Observation concluded. Human adaptability confirmed beyond doubt. The moderator's tail thumped once, the sound echoing through the chamber. Results accepted. The professor's claim of inevitable failure is disproved. Humanity passes the Ylathar trial. The chamber erupted, not with laughter this time, but with fervent debate. Some shouted in defense of tradition, others marveled at what they'd seen. But beneath it all, a shift had occurred. Humanity was no longer the fragile newcomer begging for recognition. They were survivors. Inside the igloo, Elena watched Jerkael slowly withdraw. His pride scraped raw. His mandibles clicked, words forming reluctantly. You demonstrated resourcefulness. That is undeniable. But resourcefulness is not superiority. Elena shrugged. Didn't claim superiority. Just survival. And survival is everything. She crawled out into the storm, snow whipping across her visor. The igloo stood firm behind her, glowing faintly under drone lights. She raised her arm toward the hovering cameras, her voice carrying through the Union feed. Professor Jerkael said we couldn't last a breath on this planet. Yet here we are, still breathing. That's what humans do. You throw us into deserts, oceans, jungles, tundra, we find a way. We don't just endure. We adapt. That's why we belong here. The storm roared, but her words cut through, ringing clear in the silence that followed. Hours later, back in the Union chamber, Elena stood before the council, no longer just another face among delegates. The igloo's projection shimmered behind her, replaying construction, endurance, and proof. The Oryxian inclined his head. The human has shown more than stubbornness. She has shown a principle we must respect. Other voices followed, some reluctant, others firm. The tide was turning. Jerkael sat rigid, his scales dull. He said nothing. His silence was victory enough. Elena didn't gloat. She simply stood tall, frost still clinging to her suit, and let the moment breathe. Humanity had spoken, not through words but through action. Later, as the chamber emptied and whispers faded, Elena allowed herself a quiet laugh. She thought of her ancestors who had built igloos with nothing but hands and bone knives, surviving nights colder than imagination. They had done it for survival. She had done it for a galaxy. Different worlds. Same human spirit. She touched her wrist console, recording a final note for Earth. Test complete. Verdict: we belong.